right, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, perfect. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Thomas Deakins, Vice President of Global Alliances and Channels here at Project 44, and welcome to our Partner Spotlight. It's week 3, and now, as we say in the transportation industry, we're shifting gears in the fact of that for the last 2 weeks, we've had partners come on, technology partners, that have specifically talked about their respective solutions and how their customers are deploying those solutions specifically to build more resilient supply chains. And they've also really gave us an update on what's going on during this pandemic. So what we want to do today is we want to take a different focus, and we want to bring in academia, and we're bringing in a professor from the University of Tennessee to give us her insight on what's going on with supply chain, technology, resiliency, and just overall what's going on during this pandemic. So again, this series is part of the out of office hours that we've been running since May of 2020. And we've been doing that specifically to educate the supply chain ecosystem on various topics. And for the last 2 weeks plus ongoing through September, we will be doing a feature on partners and talking about supply chain resiliency and technology. So with that said, it is my honor and privilege to welcome Dr. Mary Holcomb, Professor of Supply Chain Management from the University of Tennessee, as she joins us today to talk about supply chain, resiliency, and technology. So Dr. Holcomb, welcome.
Thank you, Thomas, for having me. I'm excited about our conversation today.
Well, we appreciate you coming on. I know you're very busy, got a lot going on. I can't even imagine what the pandemic has done to you, and I'm going to ask you about that in just a second. But first, I want to, I normally bring every guest on and I talk about something that resonates or how we know each other. And I'm going to take you on a little trip down memory lane. So I want you to think back to the fall of 1993. And I believe you had just moved back to Knoxville and you were teaching your first class at the University of Tennessee.
Absolutely. So for those that don't know, I'm a Knoxville, or really an Oak Ridge, Tennessee native, and finished all my degrees at the University of Tennessee and left for that first faculty position at Iowa State and Ames. Fabulous faculty, fabulous people. Never thought I would have the opportunity to come back to Tennessee in 2 very short years that occurred. It is starting year 29 for me here, and I can't tell you just how fabulous it's been to be a part of this faculty.
That's great. And the reason I bring up 1993 is because that's the first time that I met you, and you were my professor that semester in that logistics class. And I will always remember that because it was that class that actually lit that fire into me to go into supply chain. So I've thanked you a million times for that, but I'll thank you again for doing that. So thank you.
So Thomas, it's just a great job. I've had the privilege of working with some really very bright and talented young people. You were certainly in that group and others, and it's just the best job ever.
Well, it's great, and it's just, to me, thinking back to 1993 and now having you on as a guest on our webinar is pretty cool. So with that said, and then let me transition real quick, because I think I've always asked everyone, hey, what's going on with the pandemic? You know, how's it impacting you? We've heard from Oracle, we've heard from SAP, you know, they're talking about from a business perspective and how it shifted their business and how they interact with customers. Yours is a little bit different. It's about how you interact with your customers, technically your students, but at the same time, I know you've done a lot of research and been very busy since March.
You know, it's interesting. I think in many ways we do look a lot like business. We're doing a lot of things on Zoom. We have 3 different models that we're rolling out to our customer base, which is a student. We're doing a face-to-face, what I've elected to do this semester. We have totally online, and then we have a hybrid, which is kind of a mix of those 2 meetings. It's just a very different energy level for the face-to-face, and it's been unlike anything I've experienced before. Just like any other university, we are on a very abbreviated schedule. We're trying to get finished early so students don't go home and come back and do reinfection. It will certainly be one that goes down in the history books for much like I think a lot of companies We are doing the best that we can. We still are not compromising on the fact that we have objectives to achieve. And in our case, it is really putting in that foundational material so when they leave and join the workforce that they're totally prepared. And the other one, which is like a lot of companies, is that the other one main criteria is make sure we stay as healthy as possible. And so I am happy to join you by Zoom today because otherwise, like a lot of other people, I lecture for almost 4 hours with the mask. And that's been really a very tough transition for me personally.
Yeah, and I know you're a hands-on person.
I
You
am.
love that. You love that contact with your students, and I think that's probably one of the best, greatest qualities about you is the fact just how much you love working with your students. And I know it's a shift, but I can guarantee that those students are getting probably the best education possible because you're a wonderful professor, and University of Tennessee is near and dear to my heart because I'm an alumni. So
thank you.
So one thing that I want to point out is we're live, and so we've got everyone that's coming on, and they have the ability to give comments and send questions. So from time to time, I will be looking at another screen to make sure that we have interaction and we're able to answer those questions. We've already got a couple of comments. We've got one that says, "Love the trucks in the background, Mary. Very fitting office."
It is. They're all gifts from students, so how about that?
And then we've got one that's come in. It says, "Go Vols, Mary."
Yes, absolutely.
So really what we're going to do, we're just going to jump into discussion questions now. And this is perfect timing because my understanding is you're coming off of your annual study and you're about to publish those results. And I know you do that annual study with Carl and Chris.
Yes.
And for those of people that may not know what I'm referring to with the annual study, maybe you can just give a quick background on the annual study. And quite frankly, how many years have you guys been doing this?
My goodness, so this will certainly start putting the age component together. This is the 29th year for the annual study. Carl Manrote was the original person who started with Dr. John Langley as well, and the 3PL study started a couple of years after that when I came back, although I wasn't involved in that, but Carl Manrote, who was here at Tennessee at the time, and so I joined it 2 years in, so, and I've been involved in that study ever since. And then we've had Chris Boone, who's joined us, and he's at Mississippi State now. This third person, we've worked with really a lot of what I consider to be thought leaders in the industry, Project 44, of which is one of the latest companies that kind of keeps us, up to date. We collaborate and really bounce ideas off of each other in terms of what we see happening, from the companies we interact with in our supply chain forum as through as other venues. And then, on your side, in terms of the technology as well, bring a level of expertise that we think is important to the study. But 29 years we've been involved in this effort.
Wow, that's great. And for those of you that many of the people on here have followed that study, obviously, but if you haven't, I encourage you to go look that up because the trend, you can see what the trends are. You can see all the data points associated to this study and get a really good insight of what's going on in the industry. So what I want to do is I want to focus on that just for just a second because you're coming off that study. What are some of the trends that emerge from the 2020 study on specific technologies and capabilities that will be important to companies in, I would say, now and the next 2 years?
I'm the data person, so I always find interesting things about the study. And in this year, I think that was the case. We started asking a few years back, what do our participants consider to be some of the most important technologies? And we tend to give them maybe a 2-year time frame because, things like autonomous vehicles and perhaps robotics and others are just coming online mainstream. What I think were a couple of surprising things this year is that why we didn't necessarily include it, and I think it was pieces before that, but supply chain visibility was just overwhelmingly the #1 technology between what I would consider to be not only companies, the shippers as well as carriers, as that #1 technology for importance.
Wow.
#2 was the predictive analytics. That was #1 the year before, but like I said, it's just a matter of do we have the items that we need to have included. And in the predictive analytics, we're asking that question about what will happen. And so this whole idea of resiliency and how we become much more resilient in terms of supply chain is really at the heart of, I think, the visibility as well as this, analytics. Reports are really so old school. I tell people that if that's where you are relying to get your data and information to do decision making, we need to order you a t-shirt that has the dinosaur with the cross, with the X, because really it's not a competitive anything anymore. And certainly in this age of where we're dealing with COVID-19, it's even more important. Now, the other thing that we found is that the number 3, so we'll look at the top ranked 3, was artificial intelligence. That one, along with robotics, wasn't surprising. But, every year in the study, we do a lot of data cuts. And one that we did, which really revealed a surprising result, we looked at it by size of company, which is the revenue basis. And this is where the small companies had some interesting input. What they told us is that their number 3 technology of all things was to focus on electronic bill of lading. Now, we thought that was really interesting. So rather than AI or maybe robotics or other things, it's very much at this executional level or operational, for which I think they saw technology giving them probably perhaps the biggest boost in terms of where they want to be in terms of efficiency.
Wow. So electronic bill of lading, that's interesting.
It absolutely was. Yep.
Yeah, because I start thinking about that now, and you get into the whole digitalization piece of the supply chain of that process, right? So it's more about being able to do everything from the collaboration with the carrier, and then have the visibility piece, and have that electronic bill of lading first, right? Because it makes it easier on the shipper and the carrier, and then being able to do the tracking and then push that down the rest of the process. So that's an interesting data point, and I'm interested to see that the small shippers think that that's a place for improvement. So that's good to know.
It is. It's just not as strategic as the other 2 were. Medium-sized firms, in terms of firms that are, that what I would consider to be that 1 billion to 3 billion, and then the really large firms are 3 billion or more, but that less than 500 million in terms of small firms, that was just something. I think that if we look at the biggest challenge still as it relates to technology, and I certainly like your input on this about it, that I see that there's still too many disparate supply chain technologies that are not integrated. And I see that there's this great need to do that. And here's a data factoid I thought you might find interesting, Thomas. So in 2010, the number of things that were connected to the internet, it was greater than the number of people on Earth. And in this year, it's estimated that we're going to have 60 plus billion things that are connected. And I think if I think about artificial intelligence or machine learning, a lot of those things are starting to talk to each other. So what do you see in terms of what's happening in terms of this isolation or these islands of technologies that we see?
Well, so I'll give you my example from Project 44 is the fact is that we're that advanced visibility platform. So you build the platform to where you can have partners be able to connect and pass data to and from. And I'll give you a great example. You may be a shipper, for instance, and you need to go and have connections to all your supply chain parties for collaboration. You can utilize this platform and have this one-to-many connection. So you don't have to go out and make these point-to-point connections. You have the capability to plug into the platform and then immediately take advantage of all of these different types of connections. And those connections could be as simple as, visibility for your truckload carrier. It could be visibility for your ocean container, tracking your ocean container. But then it could also be, hey, I want to raise that up a level because I need information of what's inside the trailer, for instance, temperature, vibration. So I need to be connected to that device, or I need to be connected downstream to additional parties. So we're actually seeing, for instance, shippers want to be connected on their inbound side for their prepaid and collect, right? So they can have visibility to both, and that's 2 different process flows. And could be multiple parties. So I think that the simple answer is having the ability to connect through a platform with that one-to-many connection instead of companies having to go out and connect so many different times, it relieves the spaghetti architecture per se.
It really does. So, I mean, even in terms of the predictive analytics, I mean, we're thinking about being able to price capacity. We know it's getting really tight right now. And so unless we have that ability, we certainly can't rely on a report that comes out days or weeks later. Things like forecasting inventory or managing that better. And as I said previously, the topic of this series is really about how we become more resilient by using things like the visibility as well as the predictive analytics.
Yeah, and the only other thing I'd add to that is the fact is that we look at ourselves as that connective tissue that sits there between the shipper and the carrier base, or that shipper and all the other parties that they need to collaborate with to facilitate just what you said and make it easier for that data to flow, and also be able to offer a more digital experience across the entire process. So we're seeing customers benefit from that. And I think that's why we're seeing a greater adoption of visibility across the industry now.
Thomas, you and I had talked earlier about the fact that, what had changed, let's say, since 1993, or really the rate of change. And I think that so many of the basics are the same in terms of operational excellence, but it's how we're using technology now, I think, to get there, and just the level of information that really is going that end to end, and particularly to the consumer. We used to talk about, I think, if I refer to the old days of 5 business days being an acceptable, cycle or order lead time. And now we're talking about same day in terms of that delivery. And I still think that depending on what happens with, additive manufacturing or other things, we're going to be looking at much smaller time components. Even before COVID-19 or the pandemic, we were talking about the fact that, this direct to consumer, not just the business to consumer now, but that direct, and how far upstream in the supply chain we're going to be able to do that and still meet those service requirements. And, if you look at things now, we're talking about, contactless delivery. And we can't do that unless we really have all of these technologies integrated to make sure we do have this seamless flow. Because what we know is that customers and even consumers are not willing to have anything less than that perfect flow of information.
Right. And we call that the delivery experience or the delivery economy, right? Because if you think about it, I think back to a quote that our CEO, Jet McCandless, was talking about. The experience is just, the delivery experience is just as important as the product itself at times. Because if you had a bad delivery experience, then you're not going to appreciate the product, and definitely not appreciate, that company and everything. And so we're seeing a lot more focus on that delivery experience, and that goes back to having that data and making sure that your customers have that data as well.
Absolutely.
It's the Amazon effect.
It used to be the Walmart effect, and they certainly are going head-to-head competition, but definitely Amazon, I think, is redefining what that threshold is for competition in that area.
Sure. Let me check the comments real quick. This is great, by the way. So we have another Go Vols. And then we've got, here's a great one. It says, "Hi, Mary, wondering if there are any trends that you see repeating year after year in your reports."
We had talked about that. I think one of the things that many of our participants, as well as people that are interested in the study results, ask us about the performance metrics. We are one of the few studies, if not the only, that looks at that across modes, across what we consider to be those 4 big what I consider to be measurements. On time, we look at the order fill rate generally, we look at damage. And because we have others now that are collecting statistics, we are not looking at those so much, since those hard numbers are hard to get. But what we've seen happen over time is that we're still struggling on the service side, much of what you said in terms of that customer experience. We've also seen some consistency in the sense that a lot of firms are moving away from this mentality of cost reduction, and they really are moving into more of a service component. But I will tell you, I think what has been surprising to me is that since we have just been in this era of this huge supply chain disruption, or this event through the pandemic, I thought, because we did the survey back at the end of May and the beginning of June, that we would see this kind of move, or at least small shift back to cost, because there are so many firms that are really feeling the pain of this, as well as people. That's not been the case. Like you said, Thomas, there continues to be this emphasis on service. And in my personal opinion on that is that technology has really enabled us to look much broader and wider in terms of the source of supply for a number of things. So competition is only magnified in terms of number, which elevates that level of service and that experience, and has just heightened that capability in terms of what we do. We have lots of offerings, but we still have not enough people that have met that level of service that makes them very competitive.
Yeah, great point. And then we have one other question that's come in. How big of a role do software vendors who provide TMS selections, this gentleman says, I work for one of them, and we also integrate with Project 44. All right, great. Play with the massive scale of e-commerce due to the pandemic?
You know, I think even before that, they've been a very important role. If we looked at different supply chain technologies, what I would say is that the ROI on something like the TMS has been well established now for years. When we moved to software as a solution, what we saw is this gap that the big firms had it because they had the budgets, they had the deeper pockets, and could buy it, install it, and use it. Is that when it moved to SaaS, then what we found is that the smaller firms could also avail themselves of that advantage, and they did. And so we saw that technology gap close very, very quickly between just size of firm. As I said, we look at that, and so we find that that's been a very basic, elemental part of what we do in supply chain. And I think what we've seen is that in terms of integration, TMS is probably, along with WMS, one of the most integrated pieces of supply chain technology that we've seen. It's some of the other visibility pieces that continue to sew all of those together that you had talked about that I think are still areas of opportunity.
Right. And, the way I see it is that the visibility provider, like Project 44, we plug into those TMSs, for instance. So we have those native integrations to allow you to have, the analogy I always give is that that's your car, and we are the better fuel for that engine, so that you can make those decisions right there in the TMS, because you've already made an investment in that TMS. If you have good data, you can make better decisions. And most of those decisions, let's face it, are during the execution phase, because a plan is a plan. And once we throw it across the wall and go into execution, that's where things happen.
That's where planning is everything. I think it was Eisenhower that made the famous statement that a plan is nothing and planning is everything, because we do know that things happen. The more we move into that direct to consumer, the more that I think that our traditional or our mainstay like TMS and others have to really become a very integrated part of that partner, that supply chain partner that's further upstream. So if we want to shift that product or products from our supplier, whether that's a tier 1 or tier 2, the customer doesn't really care. They just want that seamless experience, like you said, when they want it, what quantity they want, condition, etc. And unless we have that integration, that's not going to happen. And even, so that part we have to make sure that we're ready to roll as it relates to that.
Sure. And so I'll ask you this one. This was one. So how's technology making the way we manage and procure transportation services? So how's that impacting the way that we do that now?
Oh, we started asking this question a couple of years ago, and this year we got some really interesting results again. So let me just say, before anybody out there panics, if you're a carrier, I'll tell you that contracted services are still the predominant or main way in which companies procure those services. But when we started digging a little bit deeper, what we saw is that there's a clearer picture of what's happening in this area. So the biggest shift that we saw in how we procure those services involves the shift away from those providers that offer limited technology. So that would be providers as well as brokers. And as I had said previously, if the message couldn't be any clearer, nor could it be even more reinforced in the sense that that's a critical piece. And we're not talking about spreadsheets. That really is just not how we're making the connectivity in terms of the visibility and the other components from that whole order placement until it arrives at my doorstep or your doorstep. And then we also saw that the biggest positive shift in that we intend to use them or will increase our use occurred by those companies that said they're going to start with the app-based companies or truck brokerage, such as Uber Freight, Convoy, or even LoadSmart. Now, this is probably not a surprise to anybody that's listening today, because as you know, when we read Transport Topics, any of the other, Journal of Commerce and others that come across, Wall Street Journal even talks about the success that these types of companies are having. All of us want things to be just as easy as it is for anything, and that's the smartphone and the app-based approach. And that's really, I think, how simple we have to think about what we do in supply chain, logistics and or transportation, having it be that easy and simple.
Yeah, that's great. And absolutely, I agree to that. I mean, everybody, if you think about where we are with the generation, and you think about, your students, for instance, when your students leave, they want technology in that fashion. They want technology to be at their fingertips. And the last thing they want to have to do is go to an application and open 16 windows. So you're absolutely right. And if I can make that process as efficient as possible, then that's great. One thing that we got.
I do want to make one thing clear about that, though, and that is I don't think we've compromised on the rigor of the solution. And so that's the other thing, is that I can, clearly kind of remember about conversations about the interfaces, how simple or easy. And then we'd have those that would tout, how fabulous these algorithms are in that. I think that we still have to have that rigor, but we can't forget the ease of use by the person, company, or those that are working in supply chain.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. Absolutely. So we're on two different platforms here. Some of you are on Zoom and some of you are on LinkedIn Live, and we thank you for both. And so I'm trying to pull comments from both. We've got a comment from the Zoom Live, Mary, and I think you're going to love this one. Carl Monroe has joined us, and Carl says, "Hey, Thomas, thank you for your kind words regarding this study. One of the best things about it is having the opportunity to work with Mary. She's the consummate professional and academic and thought leader, and has impacted more lives than we know." Carl.
Oh, I tell you, you've got to stop then.
My goal was to see if we could get a cheer out of you, but no, I'm kidding. I know we're coming up on our time, but I've got one more question if you don't care.
Okay.
So how do companies perceive supply chain visibility versus their customers? I know that was one of the things that it was in your study as too.
It is, and I was hoping we'd get time to look at this, because as good as I think that we're becoming in terms of supply chain visibility, we still have this gap. So in all these studies, we try to ask, one point and then try to validate it again, because often what we find is what you tell us originally may not be the absolute or the way it really is, just like a lot of things. And so when we ask companies, they said in general that they perceive that real-time visibility, it's possible, it's practical, and it's cost effective. Sounds great, doesn't it? Well, then when we ask again in terms of a slightly different way of positioning it, they also noted that their customers' expectations for real-time visibility, it's greater than what they're currently are technologically is possible. So, and that's been the conversation, is all that what the expectations are in terms of visibility is a moving target. That what we have today, we love, but we always want more. And I think that that's kind of what this gap is saying. But I think that, we have to know what that gap is to be able to start addressing it and closing it. So we can't rest on our laurels thinking that, if we're providing this visibility with this great integrator like Project 44 and others that are doing these integrations and providing that end-to-end, I think customers will always still want more, and how we define what that more is, and whether that's practical and whether it's cost effective. I think one of the things that surprised me in one of the webinars I sat on is that a lot of people perceive that if they improve supply chain visibility, that investment's going to be considerable, that it's going to be a lot of money to do that. And I think that that's something that we have to work on to make sure it is cost effective.
Yeah, that's great points. And I can tell you that, I can echo that from a standpoint of, number one, we see supply chain visibility as the number one topic that you talked about now. And I think the study from Gartner even showed that as well. And the second part is, you're right, but we're also seeing it where we can offer different solutions for customers, and it is effective from a cost standpoint, and the ROI is there, and the value case is there. And we're definitely seeing that with our customers.
Absolutely. So I think those three are definitely the components that we have to keep our eye on.
Okay, great. And let's see that we've got one more question that came in through LinkedIn Live. How reliable are near real-time model predictions? How can we benchmark the risk posed by these models apart from accuracy of modeling? This is from a data scientist.
You know, I think all of it is, and I was of that era of the garbage in, garbage out. And I think that the same would apply if we changed it to timeliness of data in, and really the usefulness or valuableness of the data going out. So if we're relying on data that may be available on a monthly basis, or, you know, if we're looking at something that comes through the census, it certainly can help us be predictive. But I think that's why so many firms have turned to things like social media. They're doing a lot of text mining to try to really stay current and on what's happening, so that that currency of information coming in is also going to be relative to or relevant to what's going to happen as we move into the future that becomes our present. So it really is all of that. I still think that it's not so much currency of that information, although if we're looking at operations and execution, that matters. It's still the accuracy and what factors can we see that would have the most impact. And I'll give you a good example. We did a project on the business analytics side trying to predict, for example, how many t-shirts, underwear, things we would sell. And the students improved the forecasting accuracy by a percentage point. But the factor that increased it had nothing to do of any relevance at all to that particular product itself. And so you see what I'm saying? It has to be something that is specific to that domain that we can understand, explain, and use. So
Sure.
all of that. But accuracy is still a big issue as it relates to the data that's going into those models.
That's right. And, you know, one of the things I was thinking about is last week we had Oracle on, and they were talking about a new product. They have logistics network modeling. And I was laughing because I was thinking about, if you're in 2021, if you're trying to model what happened in 2020, I can guarantee you that 2021 is not going to look like 2020, and those models are going to look really crazy probably.
It is,
just
and
based
we're all
on the
hoping, that 2021 doesn't look like this year.
Exactly.
But certainly it's not a data period outlier. It's going to be more of a very significant outlier. And I really think that in many ways the supply chain is not going to go back to what it was before, and that brings the conversation back to resilience. I think that where we're moving to is going to be better than what it was before the pandemic. This contactless, more of direct to consumer, more of really pushing fulfillment out closer to the customer itself. You've seen how many stores, brick and mortar, that are going bankrupt, but yet we're moving in terms of fulfillment centers and how we do that. So I think we're going to be more resilient and we're going to be better, but it's definitely going to be different. And using the past to be able to predict where we're headed, the innovation now is really catching up, I think, with the technology. And I'm pretty excited about what's going to happen in 2021.
Yeah, so am I. And we're very excited at the fact that, you know, with the pandemic, it exposed the need for visibility, right?
Yes.
And we're seeing customers say, okay, I've got to have visibility. I've got to adopt this now so that I understand where are my goods, but most importantly, so my customers understand that, which drives back to that delivery experience. But then I can take that data and I can make decisions based on that. So it ties back to, you know, looking at it from a modeling perspective, and also just how you build up that and be more resilient. Because what happens if we have another pandemic, for instance, or if this carries over in 2021, and I hope it doesn't.
Absolutely. I think we need all of it. And that's why I think it's been so high on the list of really technologies that are critical.
All right. I will check one more time for comments. You've been nice enough to go over here for a few minutes. I think we're good on that. You know, great session today. Thank you for your input. As always, great to see you. And for our viewers, thank you for attending. You can come back to our website. We'll have a replay of this. And then also, let me just point out that we'll shift gears again next week for next Wednesday when we bring on Fab Braska from Blue Yonder. and Fab will be talking about how Blue Yonder is offering customers their technology to build more resilient supply chains. And so we'll get the input from the Blue Yonder team. But again, Dr. Holcomb, thank you for everything. Thanks for your time, and most importantly, your thought leadership. So thank you.
Thank you for having me, Thomas.
Goodbye, everyone.